Right. In the last class, we discussed about polymorphism. Right. What are the examples of polymorphism? Method overloading and what? Method overriding. Okay. Right. So we have discussed what is method overloading and what is method overriding. Now let us see hierarchy of constructor execution. Hierarchy of constructor execution. What is the last program number? 19. Huh? Right. So in this example, we have seen how to redefine the instance methods. Okay. Whenever a subclass wants to redefine the superclass method, the subclass has to redeclare the superclass instance method by using what keyword? Redefinition keyword. And whenever we redefine the superclass method inside the subclass, it is recommended to call the superclass implementation by using what keyword? Super keyword. Okay. Now let us see hierarchy of constructor execution. We have different scenarios here. So let's see one by one. Hierarchy of constructor execution. This is scenario 1. Right. So if you see here, this is a scenario. If the superclass contains static and instance constructor and subclass without any constructors, and if you instantiate first object of superclass, done. Okay. So let's see it practically. Right. I'll take one class here. Let me give the class name as LCL underscore super. You can give any name. Done. End class. Then in the public section of this class, I'll declare one what instance constructor. How to declare instance constructor? By using the keyword what? Constructor. And let me also declare one static constructor. Class methods class underscore constructor. Done. So let us implement both the methods. Method constructor, end method, inside instance constructor of what? Superclass. Implement the static constructor also. Method class underscore constructor inside what? Static constructor of what? Superclass. Okay. Done. So this is a superclass which contains both instance and static constructor. Now let me take one subclass. I'll give the name of the class as something sub definition inheriting from what is a superclass? LCL underscore super. What is the inheritance principle? Whenever we inherit a class, the public and protected components will be inherited to what? Subclass. Okay. Right. So my superclass contains both instance as well as what? Static, and subclass doesn't have its own constructors. It doesn't have its own constructor. So since I don't have any direct methods of subclass, I need not implement the subclass. I'm just creating an empty subclass. Now in the start of selection, I'll create the object of, uh, let me say, first object of subclass data ob1 type ref2 lcl underscore sub. Then I'll create the object, create object ob1. Is it clear? So subclass doesn't have its own constructor, but superclass contains both static and what? Instance. And I'm instantiating which class here? Subclass. Okay, I'm instantiating the subclass. Already we know whenever we create the object of a class, what happens? Constructor gets executed, instance constructor gets executed. But here we are creating the object for which class? Subclass. Subclass doesn't have its own constructors. Okay, so let's see what happens. Right, so when I execute, what happened? Even though you are creating the first object of subclass, it is executing what? Constructors of what? Superclass. So as usual, it is executing the static constructor first, and then what? Instance constructor. So what you have to understand in this scenario is, whenever we are creating the object for a class, we should not focus only on that class. We should also check whether that class contains any superclass, and that superclass might contain what constructors, and that constructors gets what? Executed. Is it clear? So I got the both static as well as what? Instance. Now let me create second object. I'll create the second object. Let me give the name as something ob2. Right, this is a second object of what? Subclass. So when I execute, what happened again? Only instance. Already we know static constructor gets executed only once in the lifetime of entire class. So it already got executed. That's why only instance got executed. Am I clear? So here I am directly creating the objects for which classes? What? Subclass. Now let me comment this too. Yeah, see here, I'll create the first object of superclass. Let me give the name as something K1. What is the superclass name? LCL underscore super, and this is the object K1. So what I'm doing here, I'm creating the first object of what? Superclass. So what happens now? It executes static first and then what? Instance. Okay, so when I execute, what happened? Static constructor superclass and then what? Instance constructor superclass. Let me create second object. I am creating the second object of superclass. What happened? Only instance of what? Superclass. Now what I'll do is, I will create first object of what? What is this? First object of subclass. So earlier case, what happened? When I'm directly creating the first object of subclass, what happened? Static constructor and then what? Instance got executed. Now already static got executed. Now let's see what happens. What happened? Only instance of super got executed, and when I create the second object also, again only instance will be executed. Is it clear? So the point you have to understand from this scenario is, whenever we are creating the object of any class, we should not focus on constructors of that class. We should also check whether the superclass contains any what? Constructors. So superclass constructors also gets executed. Am I clear? Now if you see the point here, see this. If a superclass contains static and what? Instance constructor, and subclass without any constructor. That's what the first scenario. No? Subclass doesn't have any constructors. And if we instantiate first object of what? Superclass or what? Subclass, before accessing any static components of what? Super of sub, then SAP first executes what? Static constructor and then what? Instance constructor of what? Superclass. And from second object of superclass or subclass, only instance constructor of superclass will be executed. Okay, so the main point you have to understand from this is, let me comment this for your reference. I am directly creating what? first object of what? Subclass. Even though subclass doesn't have its own constructors, it is executing what? Constructors of what? Superclass. So that is what is the main focus here. Understood? So when you are working with what? Standard classes, when you try to create the object of any standard class, we have to check whether that standard class contains any superclass, and that superclass might contain what? Constructors. So that constructors gets executed. Is it clear? This is one scenario. Any questions online? You are newcomer. What's your name? What's your name? Sorry? Siddharth. Okay. Same group, huh? Okay. Hmm? Okay. Yeah, online, any questions? Classroom? No? Right. So let's see. Second scenario. I'll copy 20 to 21. See the second scenario. If a superclass contains static and what? Instance constructor and subclass only with what? Static constructor. So let us take that scenario. So this is my superclass which contains both instance and what? Static. Now inside the subclass also. Now one important point here. Yeah. Whenever we do the inheritance, what happens? Public and protected will be inherited to what? Subclass. So already we know constructors are always declared in what? Public section. So technically these two will be inherited to what? Subclass. Now what I'll do is inside my subclass in the public section I'll say class methods class underscore what? Constructors. So is this valid or invalid? Hmm? Try to understand. Whenever we do the inheritance, okay, all the public and protected will be inherited to what? Subclass. Okay, so these two will be inherited to what? Subclass. That is what is the understanding according to what? Inheritance. Now inside the subclass I am once again declaring what? Static constructor. So in the last class I think I discussed about what? Method overloading. Okay, so can I declare the same method once again in the subclass? Huh? No, right? So here, understanding is what? This method already got inherited from where? Superclass. So I'm trying to declare the same method once again. So in case of normal method, you will get an error. Okay, I'll put it like this, just to avoid confusion. 1 second. I'll comment everything. Let me repeat this. So here I'll say methods what? M1. Method M1 end method inside instance method M1 of what? Superclass. Okay, so this is my superclass which contains a method M1. Will this method M1 is inherited to subclass? Yes, because it is what? Public. Now once again in the subclass, I'll try to say methods M1. Is it valid or invalid? Hmm? Yeah, it is invalid. It is invalid because a class cannot contain two methods with what? Same name. So obviously I'll get an error. What? Method M1 is already been declared. Okay, so this anyhow we know. Okay, now keeping this point in mind, so this will give you what? Syntax error. So these constructors are also public. Na? So this also should be inherited to what? Subclass. So once again, I am trying to declare static constructor inside what? Subclass. So by looking at this concept, I am expecting what? An error saying that this is already been what? Declared. So let's see what happens in case of constructors. When I do syntax check, I got a different error. What is that? Definition does not have what? Implementation. Means in case of constructors, what is that? They are not inherited. They are not inherited. Yes or no? Normal method got inherited. Again, I am unable to declare what? same method. But in case of constructor, it is not getting inherited. That's the reason I'm able to declare. So let me implement it now. Class LCL underscore sub implementation end class method class. Let me copy it from here. Method class underscore constructor inside static constructor of what? Subclass. So what is the scenario here? Superclass contains both instance and static, and subclass contains only what? Only static constructor. Okay. Now, as usual, I'll create the first object of what? First object of what? Subclass. So see this what happens, or else first let me do this. What happened? Static got executed from where? Super to sub. Static constructors got executed from super to sub, and then what? Instance of what? Superclass. Am I clear? We cannot control this. This will come by default. We cannot change the sequence. Always static constructors are executed from top to bottom. I mean to say from superclass to what? Subclass. Okay. Now let me create second object of subclass. What happens now? Only instance of super will be executed. What happened? Only instance of super got executed. This anyhow we know. Now I'll just comment both of them. I'm directly creating what? First object of what? Superclass. What happens now? Only constructors of superclass gets what? Executed. Parent cannot recognize child, but child can recognize both parent and its what? Own component. So I'm directly creating what? Object of what? Superclass. So what happens here? Static of super and instance of super will be subclass will not come into picture now. Okay, and again if I create the second object, again same thing, only what? Instance of super will be executed. Only instance of super will be executed. Now I am creating the first object of what? Subclass. Right? What happened here? Only static of sub and instance of what? Because static of super already got executed. Na? Static constructor will be executed only once in the lifetime. Is it clear? So which object you create first is important. Okay. So let me comment this. So what is the scenario here is in the second, right? So this is understood. So if you see this, if the superclass contains static and what? Instance constructor and subclass only with what? Static constructor. And if we instantiate first object of what? Subclass before accessing any static components and also before creating objects of what? Superclass. What happens? SAP first executes what? Static constructors from superclass to subclass, and then instance of superclass will be executed. And from second object onwards, only instance of super will be that anyhow we know. Is it clear? Any questions? No, method overloading. Overloading means different signature. Do we have different signature here? No, na. Same signature. Different signature in the sense different number of parameters and different types of parameters. Here there are 0 parameters. Here also there are 0 parameters. So I cannot exactly call it as method overloading. Overloading means same method once again if you declare with a different signature, then only I can call it as overloading. Yeah, any questions, classroom? Right? Let us see the third scenario. Yeah. I'll copy this. I'll copy this 21 to 22. So when you, I'll remove this method, not required. Done. So the scenario is superclass contains both what? Instance and what? Static. And subclass also, I'll take what? Both static and what? Instance. So let us not focus on static now. Already we know this. Let us focus only on what? Instance. Right? So let me implement this. Inside instance constructor of subclass. So what is the focus here? Both superclass as well as subclass contains what? Instance constructor. Static you forget, any of you have seen that. Okay. Superclass and subclass contains instance constructors respectively. Let's see what happens. Now before I do this, in the last class we have seen the method overriding. What is the meaning of method overriding? If a subclass wants to re-implement the superclass method, the subclass has to redeclare the superclass method by using what keyword? Redefinition keyword. And it is recommended to call the superclass implementation inside what? Subclass by using what keyword? Super keyword. It is only recommended. Even if you don't call also, it's fine. Yes or no? Okay. Now here the focus is both superclass as well as subclass contains respective instance constructor. Let's see what happens. So when I do syntax check, what is the error I got? The constructor method must call the constructor of what? Superclass. In case of normal methods, it is not mandatory. It is only a recommendation. Even if you don't call also, fine. But whereas in case of special method, that is in case of instance constructor, it is mandatory for subclass instance constructor to call the superclass instance constructor. Is it clear? This is the only place where a constructor can be or must be called explicitly. Already we know constructors cannot be called explicitly. No? Can we say call method so and so? No, constructors are implicitly called whenever we create what? Object. But this is the only scenario where a constructor can be or must be called explicitly. What is that scenario? If the superclass and subclass contains what? Respective instance constructors, it is mandatory for what? Subclass instance constructor to call what? Superclass instance constructor, and that is done by using what keyword? Super keyword. Is it clear? So what I have to do now? Inside my subclass instance constructor, wherever I want I can call. It's not compulsory that I should call only at the beginning. I can call in the middle or at the end. It's my wish. Okay, so I'll say call method. How do you refer to super? Super of, what is the method name? Constructor. So here I am calling the constructor explicitly. Which constructor? Superclass instance constructor. Okay, so let's see now. Save it, check it, no errors. Done. Let me directly create first object of what? Subclass. So what happens now? What is the hierarchy of execution? First static will be executed from where? Top to bottom, from superclass to subclass, and then instance from bottom to top, that is from subclass to what? Superclass. So see here, when I execute, what happened? Static got executed from super to sub, and then instance from what? Sub to super. Is it clear? Let me create second object. What happens now? Only instance will be executed from where? Subclass to superclass. Instance of subclass, instance of what? Superclass. Is it clear? Any questions? First, let me take online questions. Online, any questions? Classroom, any questions? Call method? Hmm. Outside of the? Okay, no, outside means outside subclass. Huh? See, already we know super is used where? Inside? Then super is always used inside what? Subclass method. So must be here. Hmm. Sorry? First of all, constructors cannot be protected. Constructors are always what? Public. Yes or no? Okay. Normal methods, yes, it can be a public method or it can be a protected method. Doesn't matter. But super should be used only inside what? Subclass method. Then only it will have the meaning. If you use it inside the subclass only, SAP will know which is the super class for this particular class. Done? Any questions? See, suppose I'll remove this from here, I'll keep it here. Right? I'm keeping it in the first statement. When I execute, what happened? Instance of what? Super and instance of what? So actually this is wrong. If you go by output, it is showing like that. But internally the control goes to what? Subclass only. See here. When I create the object, try to understand. I'm creating the object. Okay, I'm trying to create the object of which class? Subclass. Where it is going first? Super class. What is this? Static constructor. It will execute. Inside static constructor, what? Super class. Done. There it is. Where it is going? Static constructor of what? Subclass. This also anyhow we know. Then static constructor subclass. Then you can see here, observe. Where it is going actually? It is going to what? No, no, it is going to what? Subclass instance constructor. Understood? First it is going to subclass instance constructor. From there we are saying what? Super. So if you look at the output, we'll have a feeling that first superclass instance is executed. No. That's the reason. Just to understand the concept properly, I wantedly kept it as what? Not as a first statement. Understood? Whether it is first statement or in the middle, always the first control goes to what? Subclass instance constructor. From there, we have to shift the control by using what? Super keyword. Done. So that's what the note I gave here. If a superclass contains static and what? Instance constructor and subclass also with what? Static and what? This is very, very, very important. I know we'll have a feeling that how do we use it in real time? Okay. So forget about real time. Whatever we are going to discuss in the last 20 classes will be real time only. When you start working with what? Standard classes. Okay. Try to focus on this. See here. Then it is mandatory for what? Subclass instance constructor to call what? Superclass instance constructor explicitly by using what? Super keyword. And rest of the part we know. Clear? This is not called as overloading or overriding. Okay, overloading means if you change the signature. Overriding means if I explicitly use what? Redefinition. This is simply called as hierarchy of what? Constructor execution. So you can see static constructor execution is what? Top to bottom. Instance execution is what? Bottom to top. Okay. Now let us see the fourth scenario. Yeah. Now let's see this. I'll copy this 22 to 23. Let us remove static constructor. Let us not focus on static. So before I do this, see here. We have a class. If I go to class builder, we have a class CLGUI what? Custom content. This is one of the what? Standard class. So if I display this class, right, in this class, what is this class here? It's a public class. I can create what? Objects. Okay. So this class, does it have any instance constructor? Where to check? In the methods. I'll go to methods. Yes. It contains what? Instance constructor. It contains instance constructor. Now, which is the super class for this class? CLGI what? Container. Let me navigate to this class. So this subclass contains what? Instance constructor. Now this is my super class. Let me double click on super class. Control has gone to what? Super class. Let me check whether this super class contains any instance constructor. Let us not focus on static. Okay. Fine. Next. Yes. It also contains what? Instance constructor. So what is the scenario here? Superclass contains instance constructor. Static, subclass also contains what? Instance constructor. Okay. Let me go back to my subclass. This is my subclass, which also contains what? Instance constructor. Let me navigate to once again. So what is the scenario just now we have seen? If the superclass and subclass contains the respective instance constructor, it is mandatory for what? It is mandatory for subclass instance constructor to call what? Superclass instance by using what? Super keyword. So here also SAP might have done the same thing. Let me double click on this. I'm inside subclass instance constructor. Let me double click on this. Right. So if you see the program code, somewhere what they are doing, call method what? Super. Am I clear? So whether it is standard class or custom class, concept remains what? Same. Call constructor of what? CLGY container. Is it clear? That's why when you are creating the object, don't focus only on this class. You should also focus whether this class contains any superclass, and that superclass contains any constructor, and that superclass might contain another superclass. That superclass again might contain what? Like that, the chain continues. Okay, right. Now let us see this fourth scenario. Yeah. Yeah. See here, this is my superclass. I'll take some parameters. Importing something x type I. So I took only one importing parameter, or let me take one more importing parameter. So my superclass contains what? Two parameters. Let me try to print it. I'll just say imported parameters. What are they? X comma y. I'm just displaying that imported parameters. Is it clear? Now let us go to subclass instance constructor. Right. So this is my subclass instance constructor. Here I'll take one parameter importing art type. Is it clear? Superclass contains two importing parameters. Subclass contains what? One importing parameter. Okay. So here I'm just commenting the objects creation. So what is the concept here? Subclass must call what? Superclass instance constructor, because both are having what? Instance constructor. So I'm inside the subclass instance constructor. If I leave it like this, I'll get an error. What is the error? You must call the superclass instance constructor. So when I do syntax check, yes, I got an error. The constructor method must call what? Constructor of what? Superclass. So let us call it. Now I'll say call method what? Super of what? Constructor. Is this valid? Is this valid? No. Why? Huh? See, what is the error I got? Subclass must call what? Superclass constructor. Earlier also we got the same error. How did we avoided that? By calling the superclass instance constructor. But in my earlier case, my superclass instance constructor doesn't have any mandatory parameters. But whereas here my superclass instance constructor contains what? Two mandatory parameters. So I am calling the superclass instance constructor. Obviously, I'll get an error, something like obligatory parameter and no value assigned to it, something. Yes. What is that? The obligatory parameter and no value assigned to it. Am I clear? So what I have to do here? Compulsory. Yeah. What I have to say? Import becomes what? Export. What are the parameters? X equal to, I'm just hard coding for the timing, x equal to 10 and y equal to what? 20. So save it, check it, done. Am I clear? So now I'll create the first object of subclass. Is this valid now? No. Subclass also contains what? One mandatory importing parameter. So you must pass the value now. So what I have to do here? I'll say something what? Exporting, what is the parameter name? R equal to something what? 50. I'm directly hard coding. If you don't want to hard code, use parameters and pass it. That anyhow we know. Is it clear? So I'm creating the object of subclass. While creating the object, I'm passing this parameter. That value will be imported inside R. What is that? R. So I'm just calling it. So I'm creating the first object of subclass. First the control goes to what? Instance constructor of what? Subclass. I'm just displaying that value, and from there we are calling what? Superclass instance constructor. Control is going there and I'm passing what? Two values. So what I'm trying to show is it is similar to this one only. See here, if you go back to this subclass, inside this subclass, do we have any instance constructor? Yes, it contains instance constructor. Inside this instance constructor implementation, they are calling what? Superclass. While calling, they are passing what? Parameters. Why? Because this superclass instance constructor might contain what? Mandatory parameter. That's why they are passing. Am I clear? That's the reason here also I am passing it. So what you have to understand now? What you have to understand? Okay, I don't want to hard code. I don't want to hard code. I want to what? Or else, okay. First of all, what is the understanding now? Before we create the object of any class, what you have to do? Before we create the object of any class, we have to check whether that class contains any instance constructor, and we have to check whether the instance constructor contains any mandatory parameters. If it contains, we have to pass the values at the time of what? Creating the object. Apart from that, we should also check whether the class contains any what? Superclass, and we have to check whether that superclass contains any instance constructor, and we have to check whether that superclass instance constructor contains any mandatory parameters. If it contains, we must pass the values when we are calling what? Superclass instance constructor. So we should focus both on current class as well as what? Superclass constructors. We need not focus on what? Static constructors. Why? Why? I am saying I need not focus on static constructors. Why? Correct. Static constructor never contains what? Parameters. Never contains parameter. That's why you need not check for what? Existence of static. Always you have to check the existence of what? Instance constructors. Okay, that's what the scenario here see. If a superclass contains instance constructor with what? Mandatory parameter, and subclass also contains what? Instance constructor with mandatory parameters, and whenever we instantiate the subclass, make sure that you pass values for what? Parameters of what? Subclass instance constructors, and from subclass instance constructor implementation, we need to call what? Superclass instance constructor by passing values for what? Parameters of what? Superclass instance constructor. Done? Good. This is also important. Yeah. See now? Yeah. I'll copy this 23 to 24. So the scenario is my superclass instance constructor contains how many mandatory import parameters? Two mandatory import parameters. Now my subclass instance constructor doesn't have any what? Doesn't have any parameters. Doesn't have any parameters. Okay. Done. I'll comment this. Yeah. So here, obviously, I'll get an error here. What is the error? The constructor method must call what? Constructor what? Superclass. So let me call it. So while calling, I must pass values for what? Both those parameters. Why? Because my superclass instance constructor contains two mandatory parameters. So what is the change from the earlier scenario? My subclass instance constructor doesn't have any mandatory parameters. So now, yeah, as of now, no errors. Now I am creating what? First object of what? Subclass. I am creating the first object of subclass. Oh, sorry. I'm just creating the object. Okay. Save it. Check it. No errors. Done. When I execute, what happened? Inside what? Instance constructor of subclass. Inside instance constructor of what? Superclass. Is it clear? So suppose now I don't want to hard code these values. I don't want to hard code these values. So what I have to do? Hmm? Where? Now, what I'll do is, let me go by the point here. Sorry, I need to change it little bit. Yeah, not hard coding. See here, I am removing what? Yeah, you see this? What is the change here? Superclass contains what? Instance constructor with how many mandatory parameters? Two mandatory. And subclass doesn't have any what? Instance constructor. Subclass doesn't have any instance constructor. I am creating the object. Now see what happens. Save it. Or in the first scenario, what happened? Even though the subclass doesn't have any instance constructor, when I create the object of the subclass, what is getting executed? Superclass instance constructor. So here also, it will try to execute what? What? It will try to execute what? Superclass instance constructor. But superclass instance constructor, does it have any parameters? Yes, two mandatory parameters. So now I'll get an error. Na? Yeah, what is the error here? The obligatory parameter x, this is important. Is it clear? So generally what happens is, we'll focus on only this class, and this class may not have what constructor, so we'll just ignore it. But its superclass might contain what? Instance constructor with mandatory parameters. So at that time what you have to do, while instantiating the subclass only, you must supply the values for what? Superclass instance constructors. See here, I am getting an error. Obligatory parameter no value assigned to it. So I don't want to hard code. So let me read two values from the user. That. So what is the change here? Exporting x is equal to what? P underscore x, y equal to what? P underscore. That's all. So I'll get an. I got the result. Something 66 and what? 22. So what you have to focus here is, even though subclass doesn't have what? Its own instance constructor, but its superclass contains what? Instance constructor with what? Mandatory parameters. So compulsorily you must pass the values at the time of instantiating what? Subclass only. Am I clear? So that's what the notes I gave you. See, if a superclass contains what? Instance constructor with what? Mandatory parameters, subclass without any instance constructor, and whenever we instantiate the subclass, make sure that you pass values for the parameters of what? Superclass instance constructor while instantiating what? Subclass only. Clear? Any questions? Hmm? No problem. Okay, what you are saying is superclass doesn't have what? No problem. Subclass can contain what? Its own instance constructor. It might contain parameters. Then also I must pass what? Parameters. Obviously. Is it clear? So the thumb rule is, when you create the object for any class, what you have to do? We have to check whether that class contains any instance constructor with what? Mandatory parameters. We should also check whether its superclass contains any instance constructor with what? Mandatory parameters. So in that case, you must pass the values for what? All those parameters, both superclass as well as what? Subclass. Clear? So this covers all the scenarios related to what? Hierarchy of what? Constructor execution. Now just to show it here, I'll say we are able to redefine normal methods. We are able to redefine normal instance protected and what? Public methods. Now I'll say in the public section, I'll say methods. What is this? Constructor. I'll try to use the keyword what? Redefinition. Let me check whether I'll get any errors. What is that? Constructor may not be what? Redefined. Overdefined means redefined. Am I clear? So only normal methods can, normal instance public, normal instance protected methods can be redefined, not the special methods. So even though you don't redefine, but internally it will also execute the constructors of what? Superclasses. Any questions? Online, any questions? We can access. Yeah, I'm accessing now. They are the parameters of my constructor. Hmm. No, no. What your question should be? Can we use parameters keyword inside a class? No. We can't. Okay, understood? So if you see here, yeah, we have seen types of what? Inheritance. What are they? Single inheritance we have seen, multi-level inheritance. Multiple we have not seen. It requires what? Interfaces concept. Then just now we have seen what? Hierarchy of what? Constructor execution. So this is very, very important interview perspective. Interviewer might ask any scenario of this five. Okay, very important. Can we overwrite constructors? What is the answer? No, constructors cannot be redefined. Even though they are public, they will not be inherited. So when they are not inherited, they cannot be redefined. But implicitly, when we instantiate subclass objects, it automatically calls what? Superclass constructors also. Okay. And we have seen parameters to what? Constructors. Instance constructor can contain what? Importing parameters and exceptions. Exceptions, anyhow, we have not discussed. We have to discuss that. Yeah. Method overriding is not supported. Method overriding we have seen redefinition keyword and what? Super keyword. What is the final method? A method declared as final. A public or protected method declared as final can be inherited but cannot be redefined. Yes or no? A public or protected method declared as final can be inherited but cannot be redefined, whereas a class declared as final cannot be inherited. Already I covered this point, right? Okay. And only instance methods can be redefined, static methods cannot be redefined. Okay. And final keyword we can use at what level? Class level or at what? Method level. Can I declare a private method as final? Anish, can I declare private method as final? Why? Why? Private methods cannot be inherited. So there is no question of what? Redefinition. Okay. Only public and protected methods can be declared as final. Okay. And we have not seen this. Friend class we have seen deferred keyword. Who will answer this? Raviteja. What is deferred keyword? I am not your interviewer. Sorry, I am not your trainer. I am interviewer now. What is deferred keyword? If you give this answer, you are promoted to next round, or else we'll call you back. What is deferred keyword? I am not your trainer. That's all. You'll go to next round. Sentence framing is important. No? So deferred keyword. Pratish, Charan.
If I'm having two classes,
Hmm.
I'm declaring as a friend class now. So
Hmm.
default is delaying the friend class definition.
Good. Okay. Deferred means delaying the front class definition. So what you have to say is, whenever a local class, whenever a local class considers another local class as friend, we need to forward declare that particular friend class. That is done by using what keyword? Deferred keyword. Deferred keyword indicates SAP that the friend class definition has been delayed. It has been defined somewhere else in the program, not at the beginning. You should give elaborate answer, not true or false, yes or no. Then only what will get more opportunities. If you give one word answers, yes or no, true or false, you'll not get. You have to explain. Even if there is nothing to explain, you have to frame something and explain. Okay. For that, you have to attend interviews and fail interviews. Then only we'll get how to frame the sentences. Right. Bhargav, what is the purpose of load keyword? I'm not your trainer. Hmm. What is load keyword?
It is used to control the overload. But it is used to it is this is
Srinivas.
the keyword is
Hmm? Siddharth. You are not attended, right? Right. Over. Chance over. Right, Teja. What is load keyword? Charan.
Before version it is not usable.
I'm not your trainer, boss. I am interviewer, right? You should start from beginning, right?
Previously version load keyword is a mandatory, but it is not mandatory in this version.
What you have to say is load keyword is used for loading the global classes explicitly in the memory. Okay, in the older versions, whenever we access static components of a global class without instantiating the global class, then it is mandatory to load the global class explicitly by using what? Load keyword. But from 6.0 onwards, it is absolute. That's what you have to explain, right? Okay. Okay, so that's why notes is important. Interview perspective, this notes is important, right? So go through the notes and try to frame the sentences here. Load keyword, it is used to load the global classes explicitly in the executable program. This is mandatory before the release what? 6.20 for accessing what? Static components of the global class before instantiating them. From 6.20 it is not required, but in case if we get any compilation error while accessing the static components or any other components of global class, then we need to load the global class explicitly from the class library by using what? Load keywords. So the sentence is important. Okay, chalo then. So tomorrow onwards what we will do is we will start with either exception handling or or what? Abstract classes. No, no, changing returning will come here. Okay, that's why I'm not discussed. Okay, so I'll start either with exception handling or with what? Abstract classes. So I'll see about any questions online. Any questions? Tomorrow I'll start by 9:40. Final classes cannot be inherited. A class declared as final cannot be inherited. Means it cannot have any subclasses. Yeah, that you have to tell elaborately again. A public or protected method. Again, if you say method, even private also is considered as what? Method only. That's why I have to say a public or protected method declared as final can be inherited but cannot be redefined. Means it can be accessed inside subclasses, but we cannot overwrite it. We can use final keyword only for what? Class or what? Methods, not for attributes. Okay. Can I call? Your question should be, can we access subclass components using superclass objects? అదే కదా ఇక్కడ వస్తుంది. When we discuss about what? Casting. Okay, as of now, only subclass object can access what? Superclass components as well as what? Its own components. If you want reverse, you have to go for what? This casting. So just wait for few days. Answer is yes. Okay, anyhow it will come under this also, under abstract class and interface also, that concept will come. Right, online, if you don't have any questions, I'll wind off. Tomorrow I'll start by 9:40, and tomorrow onwards I'll just speed up the thing. Speed up in the sense I'll not go fast, but I'll try to cover more content. Okay, and whatever we discussed in the last 8 classes, we'll start using them from tomorrow. How do we use it in real time? That we'll understand when we start with what? Abstract class and what? Interfaces. And this is also very important, exception handling. When you go to normal ABAP or UI5, WebDim Pro, ANA, this exception handling is very important. Okay, let's I'm winding off. We'll continue tomorrow at 9:40.